As expected, the comments section on my previous TikTok video on the discovery of the Buddha statue in Kedah turned into an absolute slugfest of religious bigotry and outright racism. The prevailing national narratives within the competing quarters of this country is nothing short of toxic. Still, work continues, and I sincerely hope my narratives provides a calmer, more intellectually graced refuge amidst the prevailing shitstorm of bigotry out there. With 35,000 views in 2 days, even if my message manages to reach only 1% of the viewers, it's a win in my book. Back to the topic at hand. To set the record straight, no one is questioning the state religion of early Malay kingdoms. Every sane and educated individual agreed they were either Hindu or Buddhist. There is also no argument that these early Malay kingdoms were, above and beyond their state religion, heavily Indianized in the arts, culture, architecture, and lexical borrowing. The point of contention then is not whether these entities were Indianized, but rather whether these Indianized kingdoms were founded by the Indians ruling over a majority of local population. Fundamentally, this is a question of race. Now, migrating nobility ruling over a majority of natives is actually surprisingly common. Myself, as a student of East Asian history, I can give numerous examples from China alone, enough to write volumes on this topic. For example, the last dynasty of China, the Qing, was ruled by a Manchurian nobility over an overwhelming majority Han population. The early Chinese borderland kingdoms like Dian, Mingyue, Dongou were all founded by Huaxia. I use the word Huaxia because the concept of Chinese haven't existed then. Founded by Huaxia nobility ruling over a majority of non-Huaxia population. Even countries that were considered firmly within Chinese history, like Chu or Yue, were founded by migrating Huaxia nobility, ruling over a non-Huaxia population that became increasingly Sinicized over the course of its existence. Thus, for a student of history, the claim of a migrating Indian nobility founding kingdoms far away from their homeland is not something to disregard, especially considering examples like Kaundinya I of Funan, clearly recorded as being from South India, a claim which has now been supported by recent DNA evidence, with South Asian ancestry being as high as 50% in individuals excavated from the founding period of Funan. But unfortunately, unlike Funan, we have very little archaeological evidence, even fewer reliable literary records for the founding of Kedah Tua, Langkasuka, or Srivijaya. But a skeptic might ask, why would the locals, in building a kingdom, adopt in such totality the culture of the Indian subcontinent if they are not descended from the Indians themselves? My contention is there are plenty of reasons why one culture would completely adopt the culture of another, especially if it relates to legitimizing the wielding of power. We need only to look at ourselves today to answer this question. We are completely westernized in relation to statecraft. We talk in terms of the constitution. We elevate democracy and elections to the mantle of a moral imperative. We frame economic discussion in either capitalistic or socialistic model. Whether as a result of colonization like Malaysia or Indonesia, or through voluntary adoption like in China, Japan, or Thailand, we are all completely westernized in our statecraft culture. Now, with rich narratives such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and very well developed philosophical works such as the Upanishads and the Agamas, it is no surprise that early Malay rulers would voluntarily adopt this rich cosmology of the Indian subcontinent to legitimize them wielding political power. But all of these doesn't answer the question of whether the early Malay kingdoms were founded by Indians or were Indianized by voluntary adoption of Indian narratives. To be honest, we may never know with certainty. But genetic evidence may be able to answer a related question. Were there considerable South Asian genetic admixture into the modern Malay population? Luckily for us, there is a 2022 study led by a Thai team examining South Asian genetic admixture in various modern populations in Southeast Asia. Link to this study in the description, but the following gets a little bit technical. I will try to make it as layman as possible, and if I make any mistake, please point it out. Any corrections are deeply appreciated. So let's start. What you can see here is the South Asian clade, represented by SAS. And this SAS South Asian clade is represented by two major population contributions. Dark pink being the European element, the Indo-European speakers, and the light pink being the South Indian element, the Dravidian speakers. The extreme north being represented by the Balochi of Pakistan and Iran, with a 2/3 genetic input similar to that of European, the dark pink, and 1/3 being of the South Asian, the light pink. While the extreme south is represented by the Irula people of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, with almost no detectable Indo-European input, making them a genetic snapshot of insular South Indians without Indo-European admixture. So as can be seen from here, most South Indians today is an admixture of these two shades of pink. The further north you go, the more dark pink it is. The further south, the more light pink. A further note to make here is that this division also mirrors the linguistic division of India, with Indo-European speaking groups in the north and Dravidian speaking group in the south. Now, if there is significant South Indian genetic admixture into the Malay population, we would see this represented as a substrate of pink within the Malay population results. And the shade of pink would inform us then the geographical source of the contribution. Here, you can see the Austronesian clade, with Jarai and Ede on the left and Cham and Malay on the right. As additional information on the Austronesian clade, the archetypal Austronesian here is represented by the Atayal and the Ami people of Taiwan, with an overwhelming dark grey representation. Other Austronesians like Tagalog of Philippines, Lebo representing East Kalimantan, and Borneo representing West Borneo are seen here. Coming back to the Malay breakdown, it is clear that half of the Malay admixture comes from the archetypal insular Austronesian speakers from Taiwan. But a considerable admixture from the South Asian clade is clearly seen. Specifically, a substrate of light pink, somewhere between 10 to 20%, can clearly be seen with very little to no dark pink detected. Now, what this data tells us is that the South Indian genetic contribution forms a non-negligible amount of the modern Malay genetic makeup. What it doesn't tell us, however, is whether the early Malay kingdoms were founded by South Indians or otherwise. But a considerable migration of South Indians can be inferred. What this all means is, of course, up to interpretation, especially considering the later Islamization of the Malay states were pioneered mostly by missionaries and traders from the South Asian stock as well. Further research looking specifically at the temporal element of when this admixture took place and pinpoint where in South India the contribution came from would help to further clarify this topic. The research did give an average age of South Asian admixture dated to 600 years ago, but stated that this contribution happened most likely in waves, some earlier, some later. What this all means is that we are more connected culturally and genetically than our outward differences would have us believe. And bickering about who came first and who found what first becomes meaningless because the reality is often more complicated than simple, polarized narratives could comprehensively reflect.